This module will show you how to enter data into Microsoft Excel ready for data analysis. With a lot of our data analysis, although there are specialised programs available, Excel is still one of the most commonly used programs for this purpose. However, while the data may be entered into Excel, it is then quite common to export this across to either SPSS or other packages. It's important that when we're entering data, that we have good quality data entry. This is to ensure that we can minimise data entry error, minimise the risk of misinterpretation, and minimise the amount of data manipulation required prior to commencing analysis. Often, a lot of the errors that we see are actually due to human error and not due to computer errors or statistical errors. So when we enter the data, we need to be thinking like a computer, and we can't assume that things like color coding or free text will be easily interpreted. For example, if we were to write the word male in lowercase, the word male in uppercase, or just an M, as a human, we may look at this and know they all mean the same thing. They all mean male. However, from a computer point of view, these are actually three different types of data that you have now entered. So it's important if you establish how you're going to enter data from the very start and ensure you are pedantic and consistent throughout the whole process. So with our data entry, if you are setting it up in Excel, there are two formats that you can use. Data spreadsheets can be wide or they can be long. Long is commonly used when we have a lot of repeated measured data. And don't worry if you do set it up incorrectly or not in the ideal format to begin with, as when you import it into SPSS, there is a way to actually change this format from wide or long. However, if you know at the beginning that you will be doing it this way, it is best to set it up from the get-go. So in both wide and long formats, the columns will represent variables. We always keep our first column as a unique identifier for each participant. And then the rows will actually represent cases or events, and these rows must be uniquely identifiable. So in our wide format, this is where we will have one ID variable, and then you'll enter all the data for that one person or that one animal or anything you like all the way across. So for instance, we might have time 1 underscore, we want to know what their heart rate is at time 1. And then we have time 2 and we have their heart rate. And then we have time 3 and their heart rate. We then might have time 1 and their blood pressure, time 2, blood pressure, time 3 and their blood pressure. So as you can see, we will then enter their IDs down, and you'll enter all the 3 occasion data for that person across in one go. If it's easier, you may group all time 1 together, all time 2 together, and then all time 3 together, or perhaps it may be in this format. But this is what we call a wide format. As you can see, the more variables across the different time points that you have, the wider your data set is going to be. And it will be only as long as the number of participants that you have in your study. Alternatively, if we were to do this in a long format, we'd still have ID as the first A1, and we'd still put our variable names across the top, but this time we will need a time variable, and then we enter heart rate and we can enter blood pressure. So in this instance, we'd have the ID 1 for occasion 1, and then you could enter their heart rate and their blood pressure for occasion 1. We then have ID 2, on time on occasion 1, ID 3 on occasion 1, and then we need time 2, and then time 3. So you need to make sure that you can identify at what time point this data was collected. As you can see in this long format, we have multiple IDs entered for multiple occasions, and it goes down the page. So the format is actually getting longer. And as you can see for your variable of interest, which is heart rate or blood pressure, instead of it being repeated multiple times across the page, it is only there once. So this will enable us to do repeated measure analysis down the track. So as you can see, we have a wide format versus we have our long format. We're going to stay in this long format screen. And it's important that we use this first row in Excel for our variable names. So when you're importing it, if you have a header, maybe a title or a whole lot of information, the computer won't know what you're meaning. So it's important that the only thing you have in this top row are your variable names. Variable names need to be meaningful, but they also need to be short. To ensure you can import it into SPSS or other programs without any issues, there's a few key things you need to consider. They must have no spaces between words. So say if I was to write heart rate in, we can't have that space. That will end up being read as two separate variables once it gets into an SPSS program. So it would need to be one word, or quite commonly separated by an underscore. Or in this case, for such a commonly used variable, we could just shorten it to HR. So not only can we not have any spaces between our words, we need to make sure that these variables start with letters or with an underscore. So we can't start them with any numbers. We also need to ensure that your your variable names only take up the first row. If you have information in row 1 and in row 2, you'll end up losing information in 2. So you need to make sure that it's all in row 1. Another important point is to make sure it is consistent throughout your data set. So say if we were in this wide format, if we go back to that first sheet, it's important that we label them consistently. It becomes a real pain down the track for restructuring, and it can also lead to some misinterpretation or error if we've actually written these all in different ways. So for instance, if we had have written time 1 underscore heart rate, time 2 underscore heart rate, and then if we had have written time 3 underscore heart rate, this is going to require a lot of conversion before that you can import it or change from a wide to a long format. When importing into SPSS, it doesn't matter if you have capitals or if you have lowercase. However, in other programs such as Stata, these things are critical. So I'd like to say just be consistent from the get-go, and then you won't have any issues going forward. So if you're going to use all capitals, use all capitals. If you want to capitalize the first letter only, or if you want to use all lowercase. Just be consistent throughout your data. The next thing that we'll need to do is to put in codes. So let's come across to sheet 2 and say that not only do we want to have heart rate and blood pressure, we may also want to know what sex the person is. So for instance, for this, it's quite common to label females as 0 and males as 1, or the other way around. Now, when we code these variables, you only need to do that for your categorical variable, which is why we've created sex here. For things like heart rate and blood pressure, if they're a scale or continuous variable, you'll actually just enter the data that you have collected. However, for this categorical variable, you will need to code it. So let's go with female equals 0 and male equals 1. For ID person 1, we're going to say they're a female, and then for 2 and 3, let's say they're male. And obviously you do this at the time as you are collecting or as you are entering the data. Now it's important to note that if you've gone in, say in July, and entered all these codes, that you may not then be looking at the data straight away. So it's very important that we create a code book so that you can go back and know what you labeled these variables as being. So there's nothing worse than down the track having to relook at your data to work out what on earth that you meant. So let's create sheet 3, and if you double click on sheet 3, we can call this code book. This information wouldn't be imported into SPSS or into Stata, etc. However, it's really handy to keep this code book so you know what you have labeled things down the track. In this instance, if you had dates that corresponded with time, you could always say time 1 and put the date that that corresponded with. For example, the 18th of July. Time 2 might have been the 18th of August. And time 3 might have been the 18th of September. Next, you might write down sex. So 0 was female and 1 was male. This enables us to make sure we do know down the track what's going on. In SPSS, you actually will be able to attach that value label to your code, so it will be permanently there. The next thing is, if you're going to have free text response in your survey, you'll need to make sure you allow enough space to enter this information in. So for instance, if you ask a question saying, list 3 breeds of dog that you would consider as a pet, then you need to actually create 3 variables. So while you may think you just can go breed of dog, what we don't want to happen is you having to type them all into the same one. So say X, Y, Z are the breeds. This will not allow you to do some clean analysis down the track. So what you'll actually need to do is create 3 variables. So if we are in our long format, that will be breed 1, breed 2, and breed 3. And that will allow you to enter the data of the 3 dogs that the person liked on occasion 1, occasion 2, and then occasion 3. Another common issue that you may find is entering dates. So while we have time 1, 2, 3 here, this doesn't mean a whole lot. So with date, we need to write it in a way that when it is brought into SPSS or another statistical program, it can be interpreted correctly. So we always enter our dates into Excel as exactly DD-MM-YYYY. So it's date, month, year. If you need to check that this is going to be the correct format, you can check this in Excel. So say let's enter the date of the 20th of August 2020, and that's come up okay. If we weren't sure, we can right click, come down to format cells, and we can choose the date that we wish to suit here, which as you can see is DDMMYYYY. Another thing that you may wish to add in your code book is if we enter in an extra line, you can actually write some descriptions in here if you wish. So for instance, time might be time or occasion of data collection, date of data collection, etc. Now I like to go across the top so that my variable names are all across in row 1. However, there is no reason why you can't do it as in the example online, which is actually putting it in more of a long format. So ID, you can write a description here and then any code if necessary. You would then write your time, the description, and then you'd write the code in. So for sex, it would be the gender of the person, and it would be 0, female, 1 was male, etc. down the track. So a few tips for entering data into Excel. Make sure that you do take lots of breaks, as when you enter in bulk, fatigue is definitely your enemy. The lines can get blurred and you can definitely make mistakes. The one thing that we need to be really cautious of is when you're manually entering data, it needs to be as accurate as possible. It needs to be 100% accurate. Any errors in entering data, if you're entering it in real time, so as you were collecting it, it may mean that you may actually miss crucial data down the track. Or if you are entering at a later stage, it may mean that you end up with incorrect results. If you have multiple people entering the data, make sure that they have access to the data dictionary or the code book so that you can all be inconsistent as you go through. And finally, please do not color code in Excel. While it may look fantastic and it may help you enter the data, do not rely on color coding as a way of actually coding your data. As when you import this into SPSS or other programs, the color will completely disappear, as will any other font formatting or anything like that. So keep it plain and simple in this bare text, and while it's boring, when you import it, you'll have no problems at all.